Hey, my friends, it is time for another edition. Hey, my friends, it's time for another edition of Samantha Spinner and the Super Secret Plans. It's been kind of a while. Sometimes summer gets a little crazy and my schedule gets way off. So we need to think back to when we last left Samantha and Nipper. They had traveled in the mag train. They'd found that the secret message in Uncle Paul's apartment, when the sunlight hit it, spelled out the letters EDFU, which is Edfu, which is an actual city in Egypt, and it's a mag train stop. So they took the mag train to Edfu, came out near the Temple of Honus, which is a big falcon bird kind of god or statue that they have in Egypt. And they were headed towards the museum. They went into the museum that went with the temple. And there was a man there who was telling them about a story of the traveler and the Monkey King. So he was showing them an artifact that had just been found. They weren't sure it was very old or it might be really old. They weren't even sure. So it had pictures, and it showed a picture of a man with a monkey, a large man-sized monkey, and they were dancing. And Nipper thought it looked like a guy or monkey with a hula hoop. And then there was the man with the spear, which looked amazingly like the umbrella that Samantha is using. And the man gave the magic spear to a young woman who was very brave and very clever, also maybe Samantha. The third picture showed the man running away from a pack of identical warriors dressed all in black. We know those smelly dudes. He was handing the red triangle to a young woman. And the traveler knew that everyone he loved was in terrible danger, so he ran to a land far, far away. So in the final picture, the man stood beside a tower. It looked like the Washington Monument, but it was covered in Egyptian symbols. And Nipper said, "What kind of stupid story is that?" And Samantha pulled him aside. She said, "That artifact is definitely not thousands of years old," she told her brother. She put Dennis on the floor, because remember they had the dog with him this time with his big old bright collar on his diamondy sparkly collar. And she took out her journal and drew some letters at the top of a blank page. And then she began to sketch the tower from the fourth illustration of the story. And then we had one of those lovely random awesome informational pieces, the Temple of Horus, which is where they are at the museum of. It says the Temple of Horus is located in the city of Edfu near the banks of the River Nile. It is one of the best preserved temples in Egypt. Completed in 57 BC, it is a shrine to the falcon-headed god Horus. Carvings on the wall reveal many details about the culture of Egypt thousands of years ago. In ancient times, the temple was the center of sacred festivals. Today, it is a major tourist attraction. Millions of people visit Edfu every year. So remember, there's always that great factual information, and then we get a special little nugget of something that goes just with our story. Look for a sacred boat resting on a pedestal. There is a secret passageway below it. If you press on one of the panels of the pedestal, it will swing inward to reveal a ramp. This leads to a hidden tomb directly below the Temple of Horus. These secret chambers were built 5,000 years before the Temple of Horus. The Ptolemaic Egyptians didn't even know about this tomb. There is no natural light inside. You will have to bring your own lamp. The hallways, rooms, and everything in them have remained undisturbed since they were built, until very recently. So, chapter 21, loot, loot, loot for the home team. Normally, Nipper was not the first person that Samantha would want anywhere near her while she tried to sketch an artifact. Yet there they were. She kneeled on the ground as she copied the picture of the tower slowly and carefully. Nipper stood and waited and fidgeted. While his sister was still drawing in her journal, he picked up the umbrella and popped it open. "Let's see," he said, as he scanned the lining through his magnifying glass. He lowered the umbrella and looked around. Then he snapped the umbrella shut and dropped it back on the floor next to Samantha. "Sam," he said excitedly, "there's a secret door just across the way. I think it's underneath a boat." "Let me finish," said Samantha, drawing faster. "I'm almost done." Nipper walked away from the exhibit. Dennis trotted after him. Samantha copied the last few symbols. Then she looked up. Nipper was gone. Quickly, she got to her feet and slung the umbrella over her shoulder. Looking left and right, she marched through several pairs of stone columns until she reached a model of a ceremonial riverboat. The boat stood balanced on a wide rectangular pedestal. Samantha saw a small panel on one side of the base. The panel had been pushed open. Nipper, she muttered to herself. It had to be the secret door her brother had been yammering about while she was trying to sketch. She walked up to it and crouched to look inside. She could make out a long, low passageway that sloped downward and was punctuated by a very bright light in the distance. And Dennis, she added. Samantha put on her sunglasses, got down on her hands and knees, and crawled through the opening. She stopped and twisted around to push the panel shut. Then she headed toward the light. She crawled for about 30 feet until the tunnel led out into a wide, round room. She stood up and dusted off her pants. Dennis sat across from her on the far side of the room, happily munching from the bag of crackers. The blinky barker bathed everything in bright white light. It reflected off silver panels that hung on the walls of the chamber and out through exits to the left and right. With each chew, blue sparkles swirled around the room as the light reflected off the big blue gem on his collar. The illumination revealed colorful drawings and symbols covering the ceiling and every inch of the wall. There were large dark gaps to the left and right where open doorways led to spaces beyond. Samantha started to step forward and stopped. A black circle took up most of the floor of the room. It was a deep, dark pit surrounded by a narrow ledge. She heard several faint grunting sounds. Fearfully, she inched forward and gazed into the hole. "Nipper, are you down there?" she asked. She peered into the pit and saw smooth walls that extended far beyond the light from Dennis's collar. It had to be at least 50 feet deep. Or 500. It was impossible to tell. "Nipper?" she asked again. Samantha's heart raced as she thought about her brother falling into the pit, lying helpless and in pain way down at the bottom. She listened for another groan, or a crash, or a thump, or some other terrible sound of an 8-year-old who had gone splat. She held her breath and stared into the darkness. "Sam, is that you?" Her brother's voice echoed from a doorway on the right side of the room. "Come help me lift this chair. I think it's solid gold." Samantha let out a sigh of relief. Then she began to inch carefully around the edge of the room. As she moved, she noticed that, unlike the temple above, which had a stone floor, this chamber was paved with red clay tiles. They were dirty and worn and cracked with age. Every few feet, a shiny metal panel stuck out from the wall, and each panel was held in place by a metal bracket. Between the panels, the walls were covered with drawings. They were strange, stranger than the ones in the Temple of Horus above, and there was a lot of writing. It was mysterious. It looked nothing like what she'd copied from The Traveler and the Monkey King. There were lots of pictures of skulls and of weird people waving swords. There were all kinds of fish and birds. One large drawing appeared to show a giant squid. The images seemed out of place. Samantha shivered. Everything here looked creepy. There was something bad about this place. Samantha reached the doorway, turned right, and stepped into a new room. Light streamed in behind her from Dennis's collar, illuminating another chamber. It was bigger than the chamber with the pit in the center, and it was filled with fantastic objects. Everywhere she looked, the walls were covered with silver masks, creepy faces and skulls and animal heads. Ornate caskets and shimmering statues leaned against the walls. Baskets overflowing with coins and gems covered the floor. Nipper was busy dragging a shiny chair toward the center of the room. The heavy scraping sound echoed as he tugged it, gouging out a trail of broken tiles and earth behind him. He was pulling it over to a pile of glistening silver skulls. Samantha could see spaces on the walls where Nipper had pried loose the masks. Dark soot trickled out of the holes where the masks had been attached. Nipper pushed the chair up against the mountain of objects and stopped. He adjusted some of the creepy silver faces that balanced on the pile. Samantha didn't know what he was up to, but she was sure it wasn't good. "What are you doing?" she asked her brother nervously. "This is my chance," he said, "so use your big brain to help me figure out how I can haul these things home." "Your chance?" Samantha looked around the room. She could see that he had removed the tops from several large urns. A wooden sarcophagus covered in mysterious writing and speckled with pearls rested in one corner. The sarcophagus is like the coffin that a mummy would stay in. Her brother had pried off the lid and propped it against a nearby wall. A stream of crud was oozing around the casket from a large hole in the wall where he had pulled a mask free. "Nipper!" Samantha shouted. "Have you lost your mind?" "No, Sam, I lost my Yankees," he answered. "I'm going to sell this stuff so I can get my baseball team back." As he spoke, something in his hand flashed in the light. Nipper was wearing a large black and green ring on his finger. It was shaped like a scorpion and had two glittering green eyes. Samantha didn't need her fashion expert big sister Buffy to know that they were emeralds. Enormous emeralds. "Where did you get that thing?" she asked. "I pulled it off the mummy in the box," he said, and pointed his thumb over his shoulder at the coffin. "It wasn't making him look fabulous, that's for sure. And I really need it so I can..." Ouch! Nipper poked his thumb into his own eye. For a moment, Samantha thought she saw the eyes on the scorpion ring glow. Nipper crossed the room again and started to drag a heavy onyx table over to his treasure pile. It was covered in turquoise beads. "I'll have enough money to buy a second baseball team," he said. "Maybe the Boston Red Sox. And you'll get rich too. There can be 2 scarlet hydrangeas in our family." He lost his grip and fell backward onto the floor. As he stood up, he smacked his forehead on the edge of the table. The emerald scorpion eyes flashed. Samantha was sure this time. "I know, Sam. It's an awesome magical ring, and it's cursed," said Nipper. "I started stumbling all over this place and banging into things way before you got here." She watched him bend down to grab a small golden statue of a jackal. "I'm just going to add a few more treasures to this pile and..." "Sammy!" Chapter 22. I wonder what's going on. Exceptionally gross. Samantha hated being called Sammy. She liked Samantha, or Sam, or even the occasional Mantha. The name Sammy, though, had always bothered her. 3 years ago, the Snodgrass family had gotten a puppy. As a prank, Nipper convinced them to name it Sammy. For an entire summer, various family members would lean out a window and shout, "Sammy, come here, Sammy. Good girl, Sammy," several times a day. It drove Samantha crazy. Samantha got revenge on her brother 3 months later. The night before school started, she filled in all of his permission slips using the first name, Pinchon. Nipper handed in the forms without noticing. For the entire school year, whenever a teacher, coach, or chaperone called out, "Pinchon Spinner," the kids would shout, "Yes, sir," or "Yes, ma'am," and they'd give Nipper a pinch. Get it? Pinch on. Nipper never called his sister Sammy again, until now. And now you can see why. The mummy from the coffin was standing upright, with both of its arms stretched out toward Nipper. It was 7 feet tall, and it was a shambling mess. Putrid fingers poked through snarls of crusty linen strands. Mustard-colored soot leaked from the bandages that wrapped its face. It was the 25th worst-smelling creature Nipper had ever encountered. "Move away," Samantha shouted as she jumped sideways and then dashed across the room. "Wait, Mummy," Nipper shouted up at the moldy figure. "I have money." He reached into his pocket and held up the bill Uncle Paul had given him. The mummy continued sliding forward. Just as it was about to reach him, its arms fell from their sockets. Then its head turned upward, rolled backward, and dropped from the shoulders. "Bleh!" Nipper shrieked, letting go of his bill. Samantha caught a glimpse of President Woodrow Wilson as the mummy fluttered into the air. The mummy fell forward, lifeless, and was propelled past Nipper by the stream of crud that now sprayed from the hole in the wall behind the casket. Then the wall started to crumble, and the hole became wider. The slimy spray became stronger. "Sam!" Nipper shouted, watching the bill flutter. "I lost my..." With a sudden loud belching sound, a jet of crud spewed forth, gushing from the opening in the wall. It knocked Nipper down and swept him up in a gooey brown tide. "Sammy!" he screamed. Samantha hugged the wall on the far side of the room. She looked all around, trying to think of a way to help her brother. The filthy avalanche rumbled across the room, pushing aside the treasures and dragging Nipper along with it. His sunglasses fell off. Trapped in the sludge, he struggled to keep his face above the muck as it carried him out of the treasure room. Ah! Nipper screamed. Ah! Something round and slimy slipped into his mouth. He pushed it around with his tongue. It might have been a big gem or one of the disintegrating mummy's eyeballs. He couldn't be sure. He spit it out as fast as he could. He kept thrashing about in the sludge, but he couldn't get free as he slid through the doorway and into the round chamber. Dennis looked up from his empty plastic bag and saw the approaching wall of dust, mud, mummy parts, screaming boy, and slimy goo. He scampered quickly along the curved wall and out through the doorway on the opposite side of the chamber. The gushing, grimy river banked along the walls and swirled around the edges of the room like a giant toilet bowl flushing. Green and brown crud covered most of Nipper's face, and he could only see out of one eye. His desperate breath bubbled out of his nostrils and into the gooey muck. In his heart, he knew that if anyone ever wrote a book about his life, the title of this chapter would be Exceptionally Gross. He watched helplessly as the patterns on the ceiling spiraled above him. The raging river of sludge swirled faster and faster and began to drain into the pit in the corner of the room, dragging Nipper toward it as well. Flat on his back, he flowed along with the muck. Unable to escape, he gritted his teeth and prepared to tumble into the awful darkness. Nipper! He heard his sister shout and squinted with his one clear eye. Samantha was above him, leaning in from the wall. With one hand, she hung on to one of the brackets that held the shiny metal panels. Her other hand gripped the umbrella by its handle high above her. Sammy! Nipper screamed. She plunged the umbrella down toward his neck. The middle tip pierced his shirt collar and drove into the floor like a magic spear. Well, we certainly can't stop there. We're going to have to keep going. Chapter 23, opening day. Rumbling and roaring, the cascade of crud washed over Nipper and poured into the black pit. He gurgled and thrashed as the muck streamed around him, but the umbrella tip through his collar pinned him to the clay-tiled floor. The deep, dark pit swallowed it all. The grimy river slowed to a trickle. Then it was spent. Samantha walked over to Nipper. Without saying anything, she yanked the umbrella from the floor. She reached out to help him, but stopped herself when she looked at his slime-covered hand and arm and body. That's okay, Sam, Nipper said. His shoes squished as he stood up on his own. The room had dimmed when Dennis went through the doorway opposite the treasure room. They followed the light and walked along the curved path. Just before they passed through the doorway, Samantha tapped Nipper on the shoulder. These are yours, I believe, she said, holding out his sunglasses. Both kids donned their shades at the same time and walked into the new room. This rectangular chamber was lined with elaborate banners. Long sheets of fabric of different patterns and colors covered every space on every wall from floor to ceiling. Some were in solid colors, and some were striped. Several were covered in Egyptian-looking symbols. Others featured geometric patterns. Most of them were streaked with dust and cobwebs. Lighting the room with his collar, Dennis shuffled around the chamber, sniffing at the floor. Samantha and Nipper watched their dog move about. He sniffed his way over to a wide, dark shape on the floor and stopped. He stared at the floor and began to whimper softly. "What's up, Pug?" Nipper asked. Dennis stopped whining and looked up at the kids. His nose was flecked with tiny orange dots. "Dennis," said Samantha, "what did you find that—" "Oh my." Dennis stood in the center of the wide black mark. Something had been burning there recently, scorching the floor and leaving ashes and strange orange flecks. For several feet in all directions, the floor was covered with bright orange bits. Nervously, Samantha leaned forward and took a closer look at the floor. There were blown-up pieces of orange shoes everywhere. "I was right," Nipper said softly. "Uncle Paul exploded." When he'd said that weeks ago, Samantha had thought it was absurd. She had never even considered that Uncle Paul might really be dead. She was sure she was going to find him. She had never given up. But there were blown-up flip-flops all around them. Her brother was right. The silly officers were right. Uncle Paul was really gone. Samantha and Nipper stood in the center of the awful spot for a long time, staring at the floor. Neither of them had anything to say, not even Nipper. Dennis whined again and looked up at them. Nipper reached out to pet the pug, but Dennis sniffed his hand several times and shrank back. I don't blame you, Nipper said. Hold on, said Samantha. She reached over to the wall and pulled at one of the long banners that hung from high above. She held it out for her brother to use as a towel. Nipper took the cloth and began to wipe away his coating of grime. Samantha stood there watching her brother. As Nipper dried his hair, she looked over his shoulder and noticed something odd about the fabric behind him on the wall. Unlike the old, faded textile she had just handed him, this one was crisp and clean. It was a long blue flannel sheet printed with cows and horses. The faces on all the cows were printed upside down. The horses had 5 legs each. She followed the pattern down to where the fabric touched the floor. In the lower right corner, she eyed the all too familiar letter S curved around the letters F and C. Seattle Fabric Center, Samantha announced as she reached out and grabbed the sheet made of 90% off misprinted flannel. She yanked it from the wall. It slid off the pole that ran along the ceiling and fell to the floor. Nipper finished wiping his head and turned. Both kids gazed at the newly revealed wall. It was bare stone from the floor to the ceiling, except for 4 large tiles that formed a square, about even with their faces. Each tile had a simple picture in its center. Waves, flames, moon, sun, said Samantha, naming the images on the tiles. What do you think, Sam? Nipper asked. Does that mean anything to you? She examined the tiles again. Water, fire, night, day, she said. They both stared at the wall a while longer. Then Samantha took a step back and turned away. She let out a big sigh. I give up, she said sadly. And if Uncle Paul's really gone, I'm not sure I care anymore. She hung the umbrella on her shoulder. Let's get out of here. This place gives me the creeps, she said, and started heading out of the room. But an arm popped up, blocking her path. It was Nipper's. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, he yelled. Samantha stopped and turned around. Nipper pointed at the picture of the sun. Uncle Paul told me not to miss opening day, he shouted. So, said Samantha. So that's day, he said, and started tapping at the tile with his index finger. There was a hollow click. Nipper froze with a surprised look on his face. He yanked his hand away. Slowly, the tile with the picture of the sun flipped open. Behind it was a space in the wall. See, said Nipper triumphantly, I didn't miss opening day. The space was about the size of a shoebox. Samantha peeked inside and saw a letter wedged at the back. She reached in and plucked it out. She smiled. Wait, said Nipper, how do you know that's meant for you? It was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds and sealed with a scratch and sniff sticker shaped like a strawberry. Samantha rubbed the sticker and sniffed. Immediately, she thought of Uncle Paul and his strawberry waffles, and all the mornings they'd spent together waiting for the bus, and all the afternoons they'd spent collecting things, and all the evenings they'd spent sharing stories, solving puzzles, and talking about amazing places around the world. Then she unfolded the paper and read out loud. Dear Samantha, when I found out about the umbrella, it was the beginning of an adventure, and a whole lot of trouble. Those ninjas were using it to steal from everyone everywhere, so I knew I had to take it away from them. I waited until it was the monkey's turn to carry around the plans. Then I tricked him into competing against me in a hula hoop contest. I let the monkey win so I could swipe the umbrella while his arms were in the air and he was still twirling. Without the plans, the rain were stuck in France and they got double mad and triple smelly. I started returning stuff that the ninjas stole, and I looked forward to a long life as an explorer. I spent my time traveling and trading and brought back some crazy things, but mostly I collected stories for you. Then something went wrong. Somehow, the rain figured out where to find me. And when a bunch of them showed up in Seattle, I knew the best way to protect you was to go missing. So I put on a pair of rubber boots and wore an inflatable raccoon just to make sure the ninjas would see me. I headed out of town, hoping I'd lure them after me and keep our family safe. I left that check for Buffy to keep all the money out of evil hands. I knew she would go on a great grand shopping spree and spread the money in so many places it could never be recovered. I gave the umbrella to you, Samantha, because I knew you'd discover the secret of the plans. Those ninjas, just like a lot of people, don't understand that the world has always been full of special secrets and amazing adventures. Maybe you're the one who was meant to have the plans all along. If you're reading this letter, then something's gone really, really wrong. But you've made it all the way here, so I know you've learned to take a closer look at things. Nothing can stop you from going anywhere you want to go. You're the bravest and smartest person I've ever met, Samantha. I just wish I could be there to find out about your super secret plans, the ones you'll come up with to set things right. You have so many places to go and a lot to do. Uncle Paul. So, we're going to stop there. So they found the letter. Nipper had the directions to figure that part out. Do you think Uncle Paul's really been blown up? Or do you think that's just another thing that's going to throw us off? And where are they going to go from here? There's a lot of tunnels to explore and lots of adventures to have. So I'm really curious to see what Samantha is going to do with this new information that she has. So I will post this now, and hopefully in just a few more days, I'll get a couple more chapters done so that we can keep going until we finish. So we are getting close to being done. Can't wait to see how this goes. And there's a second book, don't forget. So talk to you soon, my friend.